Without reason, an old, racist cop punches an elderly woman, not knowing she's actually his boss. What happens next is a surprising twist, and before starting, tell us your name and subscribe our channel for upcoming videos. Also comment how you feel about the story and suggest what should the cop have done, and we will feature one of best comment in upcoming video. In a quiet town nestled between rolling hills, life moved at a slower pace. People knew their neighbors, and children played freely in the parks. However, not everything was as peaceful as it seemed. Among the town's law enforcement was Officer Mark Smith, a man known for his strong sense of justice, but even stronger temper. He wore his uniform like armor, believing it gave him power over others. Yet, it was his anger that often overshadowed his role as a protector. Officer Smith was a tall man with broad shoulders and a stern face. His dark hair was always neatly combed, but his piercing blue eyes often sparked with frustration. He was quick to judge and even quicker to act, especially when he felt disrespected. Over the years, he had built a reputation not just as a police officer but also as a man who could not control his anger. People whispered about his temper, sharing stories of his confrontations with citizens who crossed him. One sunny afternoon, as he patrolled the streets, he felt the weight of the world on his shoulders. A minor traffic incident had left him irritable, and the unending calls for assistance from the dispatcher made his patience wear thin. He drove through the town, eyes scanning the sidewalks for anything that could further provoke him. As he turned a corner, he spotted a black woman walking confidently down the street. Her name was Ms. Tara Johnson, a local community organizer known for her activism and dedication to improving the neighborhood. She walked with purpose, her head held high and her demeanor calm. However, to Officer Smith, she was just another person in his way, and today, he was in no mood to deal with anyone who dared to cross him. In a fit of anger, he slammed on the brakes and jumped out of his car. "Hey, you!" he shouted, his voice booming across the street. The suddenness of his outburst made several pedestrians stop and stare. Ms. Johnson turned to face him, her expression a mix of surprise and concern. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked calmly, her voice steady. "You're walking too close to the street," he barked, his face reddening. "Get out of the way." Tara, feeling insulted by his tone, replied, "I'm just walking to the community center. There's no need to shout." She stood her ground, unwilling to let his anger intimidate her. Smith's frustration boiled over. He felt disrespected, and that made him furious. "You think you can talk back to me? I'm the law around here," he yelled, stepping closer, his fists clenched at his sides. The bystanders watched in shock, unsure of what would happen next. Tara maintained her composure, taking a deep breath before responding. "I have every right to walk here, officer. You don't own the street." Her words, calm and measured, seemed to only fuel Smith's rage. In his mind, she was just another person challenging his authority. Without thinking, he swung his fist, hitting her squarely in the face. The sound of flesh hitting flesh echoed through the street, and the crowd gasped collectively. Tara stumbled back, holding her face in shock and pain. Smith felt a rush of adrenaline. In his twisted view, he had asserted his authority, silencing someone who dared to challenge him. But as he looked at her, he noticed the disbelief in her eyes, followed by a deep hurt. It was a moment that changed everything. Suddenly, the crowd erupted into chaos. People shouted in anger, some recording the incident on their phones. "How could you do that?" a man yelled from the back. "That's not how you treat people." Realizing the gravity of his actions, Smith froze. His chest tightened as the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a creeping fear. He had crossed a line he never should have approached. He looked at Tara, who was regaining her balance, and saw something that made his heart sink. She was not just an ordinary citizen. She was his boss. Tara Johnson was not just any person. She was the new police chief of the town, appointed only a few months ago. Known for her commitment to justice and equality, she had quickly gained respect in the community. Smith's heart raced as he recalled her welcoming speech, where she emphasized the importance of treating every citizen with dignity. He had not just punched a random person. He had assaulted the very person who was supposed to lead and inspire the police force. As the realization hit him, his mind raced with panic. What would happen now? Would he be fired? Arrested? His reputation would be ruined, and the shame would follow him forever. He had always been quick to anger, but this time, he had gone too far. Tara wiped the blood from her lip, and a fire ignited in her eyes. "You will regret this, Officer Smith," she said, her voice low and steady, laced with fury but also determination. She was not going to let this go unpunished, and he knew it. The crowd grew more vocal, and someone called for the sheriff. Smith stepped back, suddenly aware of the eyes on him. The very people he was meant to protect were now witnessing his failure. He could feel their disappointment and anger directed at him. Tara stood tall, her presence commanding respect even in her moment of pain. "You think your badge gives you power over others? You are wrong," she said. "I will ensure you understand the consequences of your actions." As she turned away from him, Officer Smith felt a mix of shame and anger swirling inside him. He had always prided himself on being tough, on not backing down. But now, he realized that true strength lay not in aggression but in respect and understanding. With every step Tara took toward the crowd, Smith felt the weight of his actions press down on him. He could hear whispers of disbelief, questions about his character, and the assurance that things would change. He was no longer the untouchable officer. He was now a man facing the consequences of his brutality. In that moment, Smith understood that this incident would haunt him. It was not just a punch. It was a lesson he never expected to learn. A lesson in humility, respect, and the importance of treating everyone with dignity. But the journey to understanding was just beginning, and he had a long way to go. As Officer Mark Smith stood frozen in disbelief, the world around him seemed to blur. The onlookers were shouting, some rushing to help Miss Tara Johnson, who had just been struck. Smith's heart raced as he processed the reality of what had just happened. The adrenaline coursed through his veins, but the initial rush began to fade, leaving a cold dread in its place. Tara Johnson, the woman he had just punched, was not only a respected community leader but also his superior. Just months earlier, she had been appointed as the town's police chief, bringing with her a vision of reform and justice that resonated with many in the community. She had emphasized the importance of building trust between the police and the citizens, advocating for respect and understanding regardless of one's background. Yet here he was, the very embodiment of the old guard, his anger leading to violence against the very person who stood for change. As Tara steadied herself, her expression shifted from shock to determination. She lifted her chin, eyes blazing with indignation. "You think you can just hit me and get away with it?" she said, her voice firm despite the pain she must have felt. The crowd fell silent, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone. Smith's eyes darted around, searching for an escape from the mounting shame. He had always believed he was untouchable, shielded by his badge and authority. But now, the gravity of his actions sank in. The people who had witnessed the incident were not merely passive observers. They were potential witnesses to his disgrace. Every person in that crowd was a reminder of his failure, and he felt their judgment like a physical blow. In the stillness that followed, Tara's calm demeanor contrasted sharply with Smith's turmoil. She took a step forward, the crowd parting to make way for her as she approached him. Her composure was remarkable. It was as if she had transformed her pain into strength. Smith, on the other hand, felt small and cowardly. "Officer Smith," she began, her voice steady, yet laced with disappointment, "you've crossed a line today. You've shown that you do not respect your duty or the people you are supposed to protect." Her words pierced through the haze of his anger and pride, cutting to the core of his character. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. What could he say? He had acted in rage, and now he was faced with the woman he had wronged. He wanted to defend himself, to explain that he was having a bad day, but he knew that excuses wouldn't suffice. He had no justification for his actions, and deep down, he knew it. The crowd began murmuring again, whispers of shock and disbelief rippling through the bystanders. "That's the new chief," someone said. "I can't believe he did that." The chatter heightened the pressure on Smith, amplifying the guilt gnawing at him. He felt like he was sinking into the ground, desperate to disappear from the eyes of everyone around him. Tara continued, "I could easily press charges, but I'm not going to do that. Instead, I want you to understand the weight of what you've done." She paused, letting her words sink in. "You need to reflect on your behavior and how it affects not just the community, but the entire police force." Smith clenched his fists, battling his emotions. On one hand, he was angry at her for challenging him, angry at himself for letting his rage take control. On the other hand, he was terrified. The realization that his career was now in jeopardy hit him like a ton of bricks. He had always believed he could do whatever he wanted, but now he was faced with the consequences of his actions, and it scared him more than he wanted to admit. Tara turned her back on him, addressing the crowd. "This behavior is unacceptable, and it will not be tolerated in our department. We are here to serve and protect, not to harm. We are all human, and we must learn to treat each other with dignity." Her voice carried authority, and the people listening felt the weight of her words. They knew she meant what she said, and they respected her for it. As she walked away, Smith could feel the eyes of the crowd still on him, judging him for what he had done. He had lost their respect in an instant. The faces of the citizens, once neutral or even friendly, now reflected disappointment and disbelief. He could see a few shaking their heads, and he knew he had become the villain in their story. A few moments later, the sheriff arrived, having heard about the incident. He rushed to the scene, taking in the situation with a quick glance. "What happened here?" he demanded, looking from Smith to Tara, his expression serious. Tara stepped forward, her voice unwavering. "Officer Smith just assaulted me. He needs to face the consequences of his actions." The sheriff's eyes narrowed as he assessed the situation, his gaze fixed on Smith, who stood in silence, realizing the gravity of what Tara had just stated. "Is this true, Officer Smith?" the sheriff asked, his tone stern. Mark knew he had to answer, but what could he say? He opened his mouth, but again, the words wouldn't come. He could feel the heat of shame rising to his cheeks. The sheriff awaited his response, and for the first time, Smith felt like he was being scrutinized for who he truly was rather than his badge. Finally, he managed to croak out, I made a mistake." The admission felt like a surrender. He had always prided himself on being a tough, unyielding officer, but in that moment, he realized the truth. He had acted like a bully. The sheriff nodded slowly, acknowledging his admission. "We'll need to discuss this further. There are procedures to follow when an officer steps out of line." As the sheriff turned to address the crowd, Smith felt hollow inside. He had always believed he was a protector, but now he was just a man who had let his anger control him. He looked at Tara as she walked away, her back straight and proud. She had shown strength in the face of his violence, while he had shown weakness by succumbing to his rage. As the crowd began to disperse, Smith knew he would never forget this day. He had crossed a line, and it would take more than an apology to repair the damage. He could feel the regret settling into his bones, but deep down, he also felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps this was a chance for him to change, to learn from his mistakes, and to become the officer he had always wanted to be. But for now, all he could do was stand there, a man forever marked by a moment of anger, learning that true strength lies not in power, but in respect and humility. The lesson was just beginning, and he was unprepared for the journey ahead. In the days following the incident, Officer Mark Smith found himself in a tumultuous whirlwind of emotions. As news of the assault spread throughout the town, whispers filled the air. Smith's actions had not only shocked the community, but had also brought shame upon the police department. Every time he walked into the station, he felt the weight of judgment bearing down on him like a heavy cloak. Colleagues who once greeted him with friendly banter now avoided eye contact. Their silence stung more than any words of anger. Tara Johnson, now fully aware of her authority and responsibility, began to make necessary changes within the department. She had always believed that law enforcement should reflect the community it served, but now, her resolve was stronger than ever. That morning, as she sat in her office, she flipped through reports and wrote a plan to address the growing tension between the police and the community. She knew she had to set an example, and that meant holding Officer Smith accountable for his actions. Meanwhile, Smith sat at his desk, staring blankly at the paperwork piled high in front of him. The phone rang, snapping him from his daze. It was the sheriff, requesting a meeting in his office. Smith's heart raced as he made his way down the dimly lit corridor. He felt like a child being called to the principal's office, fully aware he was in trouble but unsure of what would come next. As he entered the sheriff's office, he was met with a somber atmosphere. The sheriff sat behind his desk, his expression serious, with Tara Johnson seated across from him, her demeanor resolute. The air was thick with tension, and Smith could feel the weight of their gazes upon him. "Officer Smith," the sheriff began, "we need to discuss your actions from last week." He gestured for Smith to take a seat, and as he did, he could feel his palms growing sweaty. "Your behavior is unacceptable and reflects poorly on the entire department." Smith swallowed hard, knowing the truth in those words. He had always prided himself on being a pillar of authority, yet now he was merely a reminder of how easily one could fall from grace. "I understand, Sheriff," he managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. Tara leaned forward, her gaze unyielding. "Mark, you've caused significant harm to not only me but to the community's trust in us as officers. People look to us for protection, and you failed them. Your actions represent a mindset that we are trying to change." Her words cut deep, and Smith felt a wave of shame wash over him. He had always been quick to anger, but he had never considered how his anger could harm others. He had allowed his frustration to dictate his actions, and now he had to face the consequences. "Due to your actions, you will be placed on administrative leave while we conduct an investigation," the sheriff stated firmly. "This will give you time to reflect on your behavior and understand the impact of your actions." Smith's stomach dropped at the mention of administrative leave. It was a polite way of saying he was being punished, and he understood that fully. "I know I messed up," he said, his voice shaky. "I'm sorry for what I did. I never meant to hurt anyone." Tara shook her head slightly. "This isn't just about saying you're sorry, Mark. You need to understand that your apology means nothing if you don't change your behavior. We are going to implement training sessions focusing on diversity, conflict resolution, and community engagement. You will be required to attend." A knot formed in Smith's throat. Training sessions? He felt humiliated, like a student sent back to kindergarten after failing an exam. "I get it. I really do," he said, desperation creeping into his voice. "I want to be better." The sheriff nodded, but there was no warmth in his expression. "I hope you mean that. The community deserves officers who are compassionate and understanding, not ones who react with violence. You have a long road ahead of you, Officer Smith." With that, the meeting ended. Smith walked out of the sheriff's office feeling like a ghost, invisible to everyone around him. He could hear the whispers following him, and the guilt twisted his insides. He had made a name for himself, but not in the way he had wanted. For days, Smith remained isolated from the rest of the department. The administrative leave felt like a prison sentence, each moment dragging painfully slow. He spent his time sitting alone in his apartment, replaying the events over and over in his mind. He thought of Tara and how she had stood tall even after he had struck her. He admired her strength but was consumed by regret. As the days turned into weeks, Smith decided to take action. He began reading books on anger management and race relations. He watched documentaries that highlighted the struggles of marginalized communities and attended local meetings where people shared their experiences with law enforcement. Each story pierced his heart and forced him to confront the reality of his actions. He often thought about his childhood and how he had been raised to believe that authority should be respected without question. But now, he recognized that respect must be earned, not demanded through fear. He started to see the flaws in his upbringing and the impact of his biases. On a rainy afternoon, as he sat on his couch, he received a call from Tara. She wanted to meet and discuss his progress. His heart raced with anxiety as he thought about facing her again. Would she see him as the same man who had hurt her, or could he show her that he was genuinely trying to change? They met at a local coffee shop, and as Smith entered, he felt a mix of hope and apprehension. Tara was already seated, her expression neutral but approachable. "I'm glad you came," she said, gesturing for him to sit. "Thanks for meeting with me," Smith replied, feeling the weight of the conversation ahead. "I've been doing a lot of thinking." Tara nodded. "I've seen some improvement in your attitude, but it's not just about reflection. You need to put what you've learned into practice. I understand, Smith said earnestly. I'm committed to change, but I know it's going to take time. Tara smiled slightly, and for the first time, Smith saw a glimmer of hope in her eyes. It will. But remember, actions speak louder than words. You have to prove to the community and to yourself that you can be the officer they need. Their conversation continued, delving into the specifics of the upcoming training sessions. Tara explained the importance of empathy and understanding, emphasizing that every interaction with a citizen could either build trust or destroy it. Smith listened intently, feeling a sense of determination swell within him. As they parted ways, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. He knew the road ahead would be challenging, but he was ready to face it. He wanted to be a better officer, not just for Tara but for the community he had once failed. Little did he know that the lessons he would learn would change him forever, paving the way for a journey of redemption and growth. He was prepared to embrace the consequences of his actions, hoping to emerge a stronger, more compassionate individual, one who would never forget the importance of respect and understanding. The following week marked a significant turning point in Officer Mark Smith's life. He entered the training program with a mix of apprehension and determination. He had never envisioned himself in a position of needing to be re-educated, especially not after years of experience on the force. Yet, as he walked into the community center that would host the training sessions, he understood that this was the first step toward his redemption. The community center buzzed with activity. People mingled, and the atmosphere felt charged with purpose. Smith's heart raced as he scanned the room, filled with other officers from the department and community members eager to bridge the gap between law enforcement and the public. There were faces he recognized from the department and others he had never seen before. Community activists, leaders, and citizens who had once been fearful of the police. As he took a seat at the back of the room, Tara entered, commanding attention with her presence. Dressed in professional attire, she carried a stack of materials in her hands. The air fell silent as she began to speak. Thank you all for being here today. We are embarking on an important journey together, one that will help us understand each other better and foster trust between our police department and the community. Tara outlined the objectives of the training, emphasizing the need for empathy, communication, and understanding different perspectives. We are here to listen and learn from each other, she said, looking directly at Smith, who felt the weight of her gaze. This is a safe space for dialogue, and I encourage everyone to share their experiences and feelings. The first exercise involved breaking into small groups. Smith found himself paired with a community member named James, a local activist who had been vocal about police reform. James was a middle-aged man with a deep voice and an intensity in his eyes that immediately put Smith on guard. "What do you think about all this?" James asked, crossing his arms as they sat at a table together. Smith hesitated, unsure of how to respond. "I want to understand," he said finally, trying to keep his voice steady. "I know I messed up, and I'm here to learn." James leaned in, studying Smith's expression. "You think learning how to be respectful is enough after what you did? That punch wasn't just a mistake. It was a reflection of your mindset. It shows how some officers see people like me." Smith felt defensive, but knew better than to react with anger. "I know I need to change," he admitted, his voice quiet. "But it's hard to see things differently when you're in the middle of it." James nodded, his expression softening slightly. "You're right about that. But understand that it's your job to step outside your perspective. You need to see the fear and distrust people have toward officers like you. It's not just about you. It's about the people you serve." The conversation continued, with James sharing personal stories of his interactions with police officers throughout his life. Smith listened intently as James recounted moments of fear, humiliation, and anger he had experienced simply because of his skin color. Each story felt like a dagger, piercing through Smith's defenses and forcing him to confront the reality of his own biases. After the group discussions, they returned to the larger circle, where Tara facilitated a dialogue between the officers and community members. The atmosphere was tense, but charged with potential for change. People began sharing their feelings, with some officers expressing their frustrations and fears about community perceptions. In contrast, community members voiced their concerns about police violence and the need for accountability. As the discussion progressed, Smith realized how often he had taken his position for granted. He had seen the uniform as a shield of authority rather than a symbol of responsibility. The more he listened, the more he understood the depth of the divide he had helped create through his actions. Tara encouraged everyone to share their thoughts and feelings without fear of judgment. "This is about healing and understanding," she said. "It's essential for us to recognize our biases and work together to create a safer community for everyone." The session ended with an exercise focused on conflict resolution and de-escalation techniques. Officers were paired with community members to role-play scenarios that could arise in everyday situations. Smith was paired with a young woman named Lisa, who was passionate about community organizing and had attended many protests against police violence. "Okay, officer, let's pretend I'm at a protest," Lisa said, her voice steady yet firm. "How would you approach the situation?" Smith took a deep breath, trying to channel the teachings from the day. "I'd want to assess the situation first and talk to you calmly. I would ask you what your concerns are and listen to your perspective," he said, recalling Tara's emphasis on communication. Lisa raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "And if I was angry? Then I would remain calm," he replied, struggling to find the right words. "I wouldn't want to escalate things. I'd try to de-escalate the situation." Lisa nodded, but there was skepticism in her eyes. "That's great in theory, but when you're on the street and tempers are high, will you really remember that? Will you actually listen?" Smith felt the heat rise to his cheeks. "I know I failed to do that in the past, but I'm trying to learn," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "Trying isn't enough. You need to show that you can change," she said firmly. "Words are cheap. It's your actions that matter." As the day progressed, Smith felt a shift within himself. The discussions were uncomfortable but necessary. Each conversation peeled back layers of his ignorance, revealing the deep-seated biases he had held. He began to see the people behind the titles of activist and officer. They were individuals with stories, fears, and hopes. The final session of the day was a group reflection. Tara encouraged everyone to share what they had learned. As the officers and community members expressed their thoughts, Smith realized he had grown more open to understanding the concerns of others. It felt empowering, yet humbling, to acknowledge his faults. When it was his turn to speak, he stood up slowly, feeling the weight of the room's attention on him. "I want to apologize for my actions," he began, his voice steady but sincere. "I've realized that my anger and biases led me to hurt someone who only wanted to help her community. I understand now that I need to do better, not just for myself but for the people I serve." The room fell silent, and he could see a few nods of recognition. "I've learned that it's not just about enforcing the law, it's about building trust and understanding. I'm committed to changing my ways and being a better officer." Tara smiled at him, and for the first time since the incident, he felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps he could truly change, not just for himself, but for the community that deserved better. As the training concluded, Smith felt exhausted but lighter. He had begun to peel back the layers of anger and defensiveness, exposing the willingness to learn and grow. The journey ahead would be challenging, but he was determined to face it head-on. The training sessions would continue for several weeks, each one building on the last. And with every interaction, he was learning not just about policing, but about humanity. He began to see the power of listening, understanding, and empathy, the tools that would guide him toward becoming the officer he had always aspired to be. As he left the community center, Smith felt a sense of purpose rekindle within him. This was just the beginning, but he was ready to embrace the challenge. He wanted to prove to Tara, to the community, and most importantly, to himself that he could be better. The path to redemption was long, but he was determined to walk it, step by step. As the weeks passed, Officer Mark Smith continued his journey of transformation. The training sessions had opened his eyes to the complexities of community-police relationships, and he was eager to put his new understanding into practice. He felt a growing responsibility not only to change himself, but also to help mend the rift between the police department and the community. One day, Tara called him into her office. "Mark," she said, her tone serious but supportive, "we're organizing a community meeting next week. I want you to attend and participate. It's an opportunity for the community to voice their concerns and for us to listen." Smith's heart raced. He had been attending community meetings as part of his training, but this felt different. He would be representing the police department in front of the very people he had wronged. "Are you sure I should be there?" he asked, uncertainty creeping into his voice. "Absolutely," Tara replied, meeting his gaze with confidence. "It's crucial that the community sees you taking responsibility and showing a commitment to change. You need to face them and hear their stories firsthand. It's part of your growth." Taking a deep breath, Smith nodded. "Okay, I'll do it." On the evening of the meeting, the community center was packed. Chairs filled every corner of the room, and people stood in the back, creating a sea of faces. As Smith entered, he felt the weight of their collective gaze. He recognized some of the faces from the training sessions: activists, community leaders, and ordinary citizens. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation, and he could sense the mix of hope and skepticism in the air. Tara opened the meeting with a warm welcome, introducing the agenda and explaining that the purpose was to foster open dialogue between the police and the community. She acknowledged the tensions that had arisen in recent years and emphasized the importance of building trust. "Tonight, we want to listen to your concerns and experiences," she said, gesturing for the attendees to feel free to speak openly. "This is a safe space for dialogue." As she spoke, Smith's palms grew sweaty and his heart raced. Would they listen to him? Would they accept him after everything that had happened? The first speaker stepped up to the microphone, a woman in her late 30s named Angela. She was an outspoken community activist and had been involved in organizing protests against police brutality. As she spoke, her voice was steady, yet filled with emotion. "We need accountability," she began, her tone fierce. "Too many times, we've seen officers act with violence and impunity. We're tired of being afraid of those who are supposed to protect us." Smith felt a pang of guilt as he listened to her words. He knew he was part of the system she was criticizing, and he had to confront the reality of his role. Angela continued, sharing her personal experiences with the police and how they had often left her feeling vulnerable rather than protected. "The community deserves officers who listen, who understand our struggles," she said passionately. "We want to feel safe, not targeted." Smith's heart sank, but he also felt a sense of urgency rising within him. He needed to respond, to show that he understood. After Angela finished speaking, he took a deep breath and stood up. "I'd like to say something," he said, his voice slightly shaky but resolute. Tara nodded, encouraging him to proceed. "I know that my actions in the past have contributed to the mistrust between the police and the community," he began, feeling the weight of their eyes on him. "I am truly sorry for that. I want you to know that I'm committed to changing, and I'm here to listen to your concerns." A murmur ran through the audience, and Smith could see skepticism on many faces. He pressed on, feeling a sense of urgency to connect. "I've been learning about the impact of my actions, and I understand now how important it is to earn your trust. I'm not just a police officer. I'm a member of this community too." Angela crossed her arms, her expression critical. "How do we know this isn't just another empty promise? How do we know you'll actually change?" Smith met her gaze, determined to convey sincerity. "I know I can't change the past, but I want to work with you to build a better future. I'm here to learn from you, to understand your experiences, and to find ways to improve our relationship." The room was silent, tension hanging in the air as the community members processed his words. Smith could feel his heart pounding in his chest, unsure of how they would react. Another member of the audience, a young man named Carlos, stood up. "You say you want to learn, but how will that happen? Will you be part of our community events? Will you listen to us when we voice our concerns?" "Absolutely," Smith replied, feeling a surge of determination. "I want to be involved. I want to attend community events and hear from you directly. I'll be there to listen, not to police, but to understand." Tara stepped in to support him. "This is just the beginning. We want to create opportunities for officers and community members to engage, whether through events or workshops. We want you to feel heard and seen." As more members of the audience spoke, Smith felt a sense of solidarity growing. They shared their experiences, some heartbreaking and others hopeful. Each story added another layer to his understanding of the community's struggles and aspirations. "Thank you for speaking up," Tara encouraged, as people continued to share. We need to have these conversations to bridge the gap. It's time for real change. As the meeting progressed, Smith found himself inspired by the resilience of the community. They were eager to see change, not just for themselves but for future generations. It became clear that there was a shared goal, a safer, more equitable community for all. At the end of the meeting, Tara thanked everyone for their participation and emphasized that this was only the beginning of their journey. We must continue to hold each other accountable and work together to create a community we can all be proud of, she said, her voice ringing with hope. As the crowd began to disperse, a few people approached Smith to talk. Angela came up to him, her expression softening. "I appreciate your willingness to be here tonight," she said. "It takes courage to face the community after what happened. Just remember, it's going to take time to rebuild that trust." "Thank you, Angela. I understand that," he replied earnestly. "I'm committed to putting in the work. I want to be part of the solution." As the night drew to a close, Smith felt a renewed sense of purpose. The meeting had been challenging, but it had also been enlightening. For the first time, he truly grasped the depth of the community's concerns and the importance of addressing them. Driving home, he reflected on the evening's discussions. He realized that healing would not happen overnight, but he was willing to invest the time and effort needed to make meaningful changes. The road ahead would be difficult, filled with challenges and setbacks, but he was committed to being a better officer and a better member of the community. This was just the beginning of his journey, a journey that would not only transform him but also contribute to healing the wounds that had been inflicted on the community he served. As he pulled into his driveway, he felt a sense of hope swelling within him. Change was possible, and he was ready to embrace it. A month after the community meeting, Officer Mark Smith was eagerly preparing for the upcoming community event, Unity in the Park. It was an initiative organized by Tara and community leaders aimed at fostering better relationships between the police and the citizens. The event was designed as a day of fun, connection, and open dialogue, featuring food, games, and discussions. Smith was excited but nervous. This would be his first significant engagement with the community since he had begun his journey of change. On the day of the event, Smith arrived early at the park to help set up. The sun shone brightly, casting a warm glow over the area. Families began to trickle in, some setting up picnic blankets while others queued at food stalls offering a variety of dishes, from barbecue to traditional ethnic foods. Colorful banners hung from trees, and laughter filled the air as children ran about playing games. Smith joined Tara and a few other officers as they set up a booth to engage with the community. They were equipped with pamphlets about police programs, community services, and information on how citizens could report concerns. The booth also featured a Meet Your Officers section, where people could come, ask questions, and share their thoughts. As families began to gather, Smith felt a mix of excitement and anxiety. He had come to understand the importance of this event, not just for the community but for himself. It was an opportunity to put into practice everything he had learned during his training and the recent meetings. "Remember," Tara said, giving him a supportive pat on the back, "just be yourself and listen. This is about building trust." Smith nodded, taking a deep breath as he prepared to step into the role he had committed to. As the event began, people started to approach the booth. Some recognized him from the community meeting, while others were seeing him for the first time. The first visitor was a woman named Maria, who seemed hesitant at first. "Hello, Officer Smith," she said, her voice slightly shaky. "I wanted to talk about some concerns in our neighborhood." "Of course, Maria," he replied, leaning forward slightly to show he was listening. "I'm here to hear what you have to say." She looked around nervously, then focused on him. "I've seen increased patrols in our area, but it doesn't feel like it's helping. There's still a lot of crime, and some officers can be really aggressive." Smith felt a sting of recognition. "I understand. What can we do differently?" Maria paused, searching for the right words. "I think more community involvement would help. We want to feel like you're on our side, not just there to enforce the law." "Thank you for sharing that with me, Maria. I want to work on that," he said earnestly. "We need to build relationships and find ways to support the community better." As the day went on, Smith engaged in numerous conversations with people from various backgrounds. He listened to stories of fear and frustration, but also tales of hope and resilience. Each interaction deepened his understanding of the community's perspective and the importance of empathy in his role. At one point, a group of young men approached, and Smith recognized one of them as Carlos from the previous community meeting. "Hey, Officer Smith, good to see you here," Carlos said, a bit more relaxed than before. "We've been talking about how we can help improve things in our neighborhood." "That's great to hear," Smith responded, excited to engage with them. "What ideas do you have?" The group discussed various initiatives, including neighborhood watch programs and youth outreach activities. They expressed a desire for officers to join them in community service projects, emphasizing that collaboration could help bridge the gap between the police and the community. "I want to be involved," Smith said, feeling the enthusiasm in the air. "Let's work together to make these ideas a reality." The conversation felt productive, and Smith left feeling inspired. He was beginning to see the community not just as a group to protect, but as partners in creating a safer environment. As the afternoon progressed, a local musician set up to perform, filling the park with upbeat melodies. Families began to gather around, dancing and enjoying the festive atmosphere. Smith found himself smiling, feeling the joy that resonated from the crowd. Tara approached him, a grin on her face. "Look at this. It's amazing to see everyone coming together." "It really is," Smith replied, watching the laughter and smiles unfold around him. "I didn't expect it to feel this good." Just then, a familiar voice called out to him. It was Angela. She walked up, a mix of curiosity and skepticism still visible on her face. "Hey, officer. How's it going?" "Really well, actually," Smith said, surprising himself with his openness. "I've had some great conversations today, and people seem eager to engage." Angela raised an eyebrow, her arms crossed. "Well, that's good to hear, but it's just one day. You need to keep this momentum going." "I intend to," he replied earnestly. "I'm committed to being present and active in the community. This isn't just a one-time thing for me." Angela studied him for a moment before nodding slowly. "Actions speak louder than words. If you want us to trust you, you need to show up when it matters." "Absolutely," Smith said, feeling a surge of determination. "I want to be part of the change, not just talk about it." As the event continued, Smith saw people from all walks of life connecting. Conversations flowed freely, and laughter filled the air. The day was a success, and he could feel the community's spirit lifting. Later in the evening, as the sun began to set, Tara gathered everyone for a final speech. "Thank you all for coming today," she began, her voice resonating with warmth. "Today was about unity and understanding. Let's keep the conversation going and continue to work together to build a better community." Applause broke out, and Smith felt a sense of pride wash over him. They had taken a step forward together, and he was grateful to be a part of it. As the event wrapped up, people began to disperse, but Smith felt energized. He had made connections and learned valuable lessons. The importance of listening, understanding, and taking action resonated deeply within him. As he packed up the booth with Tara, he couldn't help but smile. "This was incredible. I think we really made a difference today." Tara nodded. "You did a great job, Mark. Your willingness to engage and listen means a lot to the community." "Thank you, Tara. I've learned so much from you," he said sincerely. "I'm excited to see where we can go from here." As they finished packing, a group of children approached, tugging at Smith's pants. "Can we take a picture with you, officer?" one of the kids asked, eyes wide with excitement. Smith grinned, his heart swelling. "Of course. Let's do it." The kids gathered around him, beaming as a parent snapped a photo. In that moment, he felt a sense of belonging. He wasn't just a police officer. He was a part of this community, a community striving for connection and understanding. Driving home that evening, Smith reflected on the day's events. It had been a long road to get here, but he felt hopeful. He was beginning to see the power of community, the strength in collaboration, and the importance of empathy in policing. This journey was far from over, but he was committed to being a part of the change that needed to happen. The park, the laughter, the conversations, it all felt like a new beginning. He was determined to carry this energy forward, to work alongside the community, and to ensure that his actions would reflect his newfound understanding. The path ahead was filled with challenges, but he was ready to face them, step by step. As the weeks turned into months, Officer Mark Smith continued his efforts to build a better relationship between the police department and the community. His determination to change and grow was evident in his daily interactions. He became a familiar face at community events, attended meetings, and even volunteered for local youth programs. He felt a sense of pride in being a part of something bigger than himself, a movement toward understanding and healing. However, not everyone was convinced of his transformation. Despite the progress he made, there were still those who viewed him with skepticism. One such person was Officer Brian Hayes, a veteran cop known for his aggressive approach and disdain for community outreach. Brian had been a part of the police force for over 15 years, and he often made snide comments about the changing attitudes within the department. One afternoon, while Smith was on patrol in a neighborhood he had come to know well, he received a call about a disturbance near a local park. He quickly made his way to the scene, aware that his fellow officers were also responding. As he arrived, he noticed Brian was already there, barking orders at the gathered crowd. "Get back! Move along!" Brian shouted, his voice harsh as he pushed back a group of young people who were just hanging out. Smith frowned, watching as Brian's approach only escalated the tension. The young people were not violent. They were simply enjoying their day at the park. "Hey, Brian, let's take it easy," Smith said as he approached, hoping to defuse the situation. "They're not causing any trouble." Brian shot him a glare, clearly unimpressed. "What are you talking about? This is how you treat these punks. They don't respect the law, and you think they'll just listen to a soft approach?" Smith felt a pang of frustration. These are kids. They're just having fun. There's no need to escalate things. "Maybe you've forgotten what real policing looks like," Brian retorted, his tone mocking. "You think you can just smile and shake hands and everything will be fine? This isn't a game, Smith." As the tension in the air thickened, a young woman stepped forward from the group. It was Angela, the community activist Smith had met at the community meeting. "Officer Hayes, we're not doing anything wrong. We're just hanging out. We have the right to be here," she said, her voice firm yet respectful. Brian narrowed his eyes at her. "You think just because you're part of some activist group you can push around the police? Not on my watch." Smith stepped in again, wanting to mediate. "Brian, let's talk this out. There's no reason to escalate. The community is trying to engage positively." Angela looked at Smith, her eyes filled with determination. "Officer, we're just trying to live our lives. You can't treat us like criminals just for being here." Brian crossed his arms, unyielding. "I don't care if you're here for a picnic or whatever nonsense you're doing. If you're not going to listen to the police, then you're part of the problem." Mark felt a wave of anger wash over him. He could see the fear in the eyes of the young people and the growing frustration in Angela's expression. "Brian, you're making this worse. We're supposed to protect and serve, not intimidate," he said, his voice firm. Brian scoffed. "You're losing your edge, Smith. You're turning soft. They need to understand who's in charge." Before Smith could respond, Brian moved toward Angela and the group, his body language aggressive. "If you don't want trouble, you'd better start showing some respect," he warned, his tone threatening. The young people shifted nervously, clearly uncomfortable. Angela took a step closer to Brian, unafraid. "We're not here to disrespect anyone. We just want to enjoy our day without being treated like criminals." Smith felt the tension reaching a boiling point. "Brian, step back," he said sharply, realizing that things were about to escalate further. "This isn't how we handle things anymore." But Brian didn't back down. Instead, he lunged forward, shoving Angela back. "Get out of my face," he shouted, his anger boiling over. "Hey," Smith shouted, stepping between them. "You can't treat people like that. That's not how we operate." The crowd grew silent, shocked at the confrontation. Smith's heart raced as he stood firm against his fellow officer. Brian's eyes flared with anger, and he pushed against Smith, attempting to assert his authority. "Stay out of my way, Smith. I don't need your lectures," Brian snarled, clearly refusing to acknowledge the shift in community police relations that Smith had been advocating for. Angela, shaken but resolute, stepped back slightly, her voice steady. "Officer Smith is right. We're just trying to live our lives. You need to learn to communicate, not bully." Smith took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. "Brian, you're making a mistake. We can't continue to act like this. You need to learn to respect the community, not intimidate them." Brian's face turned red with rage, but for the first time, he hesitated. He had always been the aggressive officer, and now he faced someone standing up to him, someone who was supposed to be a colleague. "Don't think you're better than me, Smith. You're just a rookie playing nice," Brian shot back, but his tone was less assured. "I'm trying to do my job the right way," Smith replied, his voice calm but firm. "This isn't about being soft. It's about building trust. We're here to serve the community, not scare them." As the standoff continued, the crowd started murmuring among themselves, expressing their disbelief at the confrontation. Angela glanced around, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. "We just want to be treated like human beings," she said, her voice rising above the chatter. "That's all we're asking for." Finally, Brian stepped back, his posture slightly deflated. The confrontation was over, but the tension remained palpable. "Whatever, I don't need this," he muttered, turning away from the crowd. Smith watched him leave, feeling a mix of relief and frustration. He knew this battle wasn't just about him and Brian. It was about changing a culture that had long been ingrained in the police force. Turning back to the community members, he felt a rush of emotions. "I'm sorry for how you were treated today. That's not how I want policing to be," he said, his voice earnest. "I'm here to support you, not intimidate you." Angela stepped forward, her expression softening. "Thank you, Officer Smith. It means a lot that you stood up for us." The crowd began to disperse, but the sense of unease lingered. Smith could see the mixed emotions on their faces, some grateful for his support, others still wary of the police. As he drove home that evening, Smith reflected on the confrontation with Brian. He felt a renewed sense of purpose, but also understood that change wouldn't happen overnight. The road ahead would be filled with challenges, but he was determined to be part of the solution. He knew he had to confront Brian again, to discuss the incident and emphasize the importance of respect and empathy in their work. Change within the police department was crucial for healing the community. That night, as he lay in bed, Smith felt a surge of motivation. He had stood up for what he believed in, and he knew he needed to keep fighting, not just for himself but for the community he served. The confrontation had been tough, but it was a necessary step on the journey toward change. He fell asleep thinking about the next steps he needed to take, the conversations he needed to have, and the importance of working together to bridge the gap between the police and the community. With renewed determination, he was ready to continue his journey, knowing that the fight for understanding and respect was far from over. Several weeks after the confrontation with Officer Brian Hayes, Officer Mark Smith found himself in a reflective state, thinking about the changes he had been part of in the community and the internal struggles within the police department. He had become more involved in community programs, attending events, and meeting people face-to-face, but the shadow of Brian's aggression still lingered in his mind. The community had been working hard to create an environment where they felt safe and respected, and Smith was committed to maintaining that momentum. He understood that his role was more than just enforcing the law. It was about being a pillar of trust and support within the community. One sunny afternoon, as he walked through a local neighborhood, he spotted a group of children playing basketball in the park. He could hear their laughter echoing across the field, and it brought a smile to his face. He approached them, keen to engage, and introduced himself. "Hey everyone, I'm Officer Smith. Mind if I join you for a bit?" The kids looked at each other, a bit hesitant at first. Smith noticed the wariness in their eyes. He understood that the badge he wore still represented fear for some, but he was determined to change that perception. "Come on, I promise I'm not here to give you a ticket," he joked, raising his hands in a non-threatening gesture. Slowly, the kids relaxed and invited him to play. As they shot hoops and laughed, Smith felt a sense of belonging. He was no longer just an officer in uniform. He was a part of their world, sharing moments of joy and camaraderie. After a few games, they took a break, sitting on the pavement, panting and smiling. One of the boys, Jamal, spoke up. "You're different from other cops we've seen. Why do you care about us?" Smith paused, surprised by the question. "Because you matter. You're the future, and I want to help make sure you feel safe and supported," he replied sincerely. Jamal nodded, seeming to understand. Not all cops are bad, but some of them, they don't treat us right. "That's true," Smith admitted. "But I'm trying to change that, and I hope others will too. We need to work together to build trust." The conversation opened the door to a deeper dialogue about respect, trust, and the police's role in their lives. Smith listened attentively as the kids shared their experiences, both good and bad. They spoke of fear when they saw a police car, the unfair treatment some of their friends had faced, and their hopes for a better relationship with the police. "I want you all to feel like you can come to me if you need help or if something's wrong," Smith said. "I'm here for you, and I want to learn from you, too." As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the park, the kids shared stories of their dreams and aspirations. Smith realized the importance of fostering these connections, not only as an officer but as a mentor. He felt a sense of responsibility to guide them, to help them navigate a world that could sometimes be harsh and unforgiving. After a while, the kids began to leave, saying their goodbyes. Jamal approached Smith before heading home. "Thanks for playing with us, officer." "It was fun," he said, a big smile on his face. "Anytime, Jamal. Remember, I'm just a call away if you need anything," Smith replied, feeling a warmth in his heart. As he walked back to his patrol car, Smith felt a renewed sense of purpose. These moments were what he had been fighting for, a connection between the police and the community built on trust and understanding. That evening, as he returned home, he received a call from Tara, who had been a constant source of support in his journey. "Mark, I wanted to tell you about an idea I had for an upcoming community forum," she said excitedly. "Great. What do you have in mind?" he asked, intrigued. "I think we should invite community members to share their stories and experiences with the police. It could be an open mic night where people can speak freely about their thoughts and feelings," she suggested. "I love that idea. It's important for people to feel heard," Smith replied. "We can create a safe space for them to express their concerns." They spent the next hour brainstorming ways to facilitate the event, focusing on how they could create an atmosphere of respect and understanding. They planned to have officers present who were open to listening, ready to engage in meaningful conversations. A few days later, the forum took place at the local community center. Smith was nervous but excited, knowing that this event could be pivotal in bridging the gap between the police and the community. He stood at the entrance, greeting attendees as they arrived, thankful to see familiar faces from the basketball court and the community meetings. As the forum began, Tara introduced the concept and emphasized the importance of sharing stories. "Tonight, we want to hear your voices. This is about creating a dialogue and building relationships," she said, her words resonating with the audience. One by one, community members stepped up to the microphone, sharing their experiences, some uplifting, others painful. Smith listened intently, his heart heavy as he heard stories of racial profiling, misunderstandings, and fear. But he also heard tales of hope, resilience, and the desire for change. "Officer Smith," one woman named Lisa said, stepping forward, "I want to thank you for how you've approached things since the last meeting. You've made a difference. You care about us." Smith felt a surge of emotion, grateful for her acknowledgement. "Thank you, Lisa. It's been a journey for me, and I'm committed to continuing this work. Your stories matter, and I want to learn from you all," he replied, his voice sincere. The night continued with discussions, laughter, and even tears. Smith found himself speaking less and listening more, recognizing that this was a time for the community to express their feelings without interruption. He realized that true change started with listening, understanding, and acknowledging the pain and struggles of others. As the event wrapped up, Tara thanked everyone for their participation and encouraged them to keep the conversation going. The room filled with applause, and a sense of hope hung in the air. Outside, as people began to leave, Smith felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned to find Brian standing there, a look of uncertainty on his face. "I heard about the forum," Brian said, his voice lacking its usual bravado. "I wanted to see what it was all about." "Thanks for coming, Brian. It was really impactful," Smith replied, surprised by his presence. Brian looked around at the gathering crowd, his expression contemplative. "I know I've been hard-headed about all this, he admitted. Maybe it's time I start listening too. Smith felt a glimmer of hope. It's never too late to change, Brian. We all have a lot to learn from each other, he said, extending a hand. Brian shook his hand, and for the first time, Smith felt a sense of connection with him. Let's see if we can work together on this, Brian said, a hint of determination in his voice. As the night came to an end, Smith reflected on how far he had come and how much further he still needed to go. He knew that the road to change was long and filled with obstacles, but with each small step forward, they were building a foundation of trust. The following days were filled with more community meetings, basketball games, and outreach programs. Smith continued to engage with the community, fostering connections and understanding. The dialogue was open, and while there were challenges ahead, he felt optimistic. Through his commitment to listening and learning, Smith had begun to change not only himself but also those around him. The confrontation with Brian had sparked a shift, and now, together, they were working to change the narrative between the police and the community. As he lay in bed that night, he thought about the lessons he had learned. The importance of empathy, the power of listening, and the significance of standing up for what was right. He had found his purpose in policing, not just as a protector of the law, but as a bridge between the community and the police. With determination in his heart, Smith closed his eyes, ready to embrace the next day, knowing that every interaction was an opportunity to make a difference. He was committed to this journey and hopeful that together, they could create a safer and more united community.